Severance Season 2, Episode 8 has high school reunions, forgotten pasts, new discoveries, and some good old sports enhancers.
How spicy would you like your chainsaws?
Hi everyone, you know who I am, any Jared B, back to break down everything in this episode. I was told output is looking great, so if this breakdown does well, it is a melon party next week. So let's just get into everything in Severance Season 2, Episode 8. This is a Miss Cobel-centric episode, heading back to her podunk fishing town, Salt's Neck, the same town featured on the roadside sign back in Episode 3, that actually holds a lot of Lumon history. Things start with an overhead shot of waves crashing against rocks, with water symbolizing life, and its waves being a natural expression of movement, showing growth and transformation, as Cobel has clearly changed from who she was growing up in this Salt's Neck village, while also changing from who she was at Lumon back in Season 1. Waves are also unpredictable, showing that Cobel's current situation is both dangerous and filled with opportunity. These opening shots are gorgeous, kind of throwing a Stanley Kubrick The Shining vibe into this secluded area. And despite us not really knowing where Salt's Neck is located in the Severance universe, these coastal and town shots are actually Trinity Bay North, on the Bona Vista Peninsula in Newfoundland. So, the more you know. As Cobel enters the town, a subtle hint of the Kier hymn from Season 1 bleeds through the score.
Kier, brilliant one, Kier.
As we get the bland, regular title sequence that was also featured in Season 2, Episode 4 with the Ortbo trip. This has happened twice now, and my guess is that if we get a Lumon-centric episode, the title sequence is devoid of color and creativity, instead showing how Lumon wants things sanitized and boring, like their endless white hallways and goals of stripping severed employees of what makes them unique. There's so much storytelling and layers to this episode that you as a viewer have to kind of dig a little bit to fully grasp all of its hidden commentary. I'm jumping ahead a smidge, but we find out Lumon had been running this town with its ether mill, allegedly the same where Kier and Imogene met in the spirit of industry, being the town's biggest business. Heck, later Sissy even says that the town wouldn't be there if it wasn't until Lumon opened up their ether mill. Now, this week's episode's title is also another clue to Lumon's ether, with sweet vitriol, meaning sweet oil of vitriol, or diethyl ether, a compound made by distilling ethanol and sulfuric acid, first synthesized in 1540 by Valerius Cortus. As we see a homeless man huffing ether from a brown paper bag, and later a little vial is secretly handed to a patron at the cafe. Everyone is sick and addicted to it, with years of exposure leading to organ damage, most specifically chronic respiratory issues, hinted at by the oxygen tank and mentions of coughing up a lung. With Lumon being a biotechnology company, it's not too far off to see the parallels of other real-world corporations coming in, taking advantage of communities, and then leaving with zero resources for the remaining townsfolk to survive.
Yeah, well, with the market readjustment from a few years ago and the fluctuating interest rates, there was a retrenchment from some of the core infrastructure investments.
What?
You can easily draw lines to Big Pharma and the opioid epidemic that ruined so many areas and demographics of Americans, SpaceX and Musk coming into Brownsville, Texas, and using it for their own rocket launching playground, promising jobs and prosperity as the struggling community has to deal with their dwindling quality of life. And big mining operations shutting down a mine, leaving the local communities as ghost towns similar to Salt's Neck, and many of the former miners suffering from chronic illnesses.
I think I'm getting the black lung, Bob.
One of the toughest things about being an innie is getting a message to my Audi. Down here on the severed floor, I found out I was being charged for 5 different unwanted subscriptions. So what do? Risk the code detectors going off? Nah, that's where Rocket Money came in to help. Rocket Money is the all-in-one personal finance app that helps your Audi cancel subscriptions, lower bills, and manage their money better. Yes, Rocket Money is helping Audi JBuck cancel his subscriptions. Once you connect your bank account, Rocket Money identifies your subscriptions all in a single list. You can then go through, select which ones you want to cancel, and then Rocket Money may be able to cancel with just a few taps. I don't make a lot working on the severed floor. Actually, do I even get paid? Well, don't worry, because Rocket Money will automatically scan your bills to help find savings. With a couple taps, Rocket Money can help negotiate your bills for you. No need to worry about customer service calls. Let the app's negotiators work for you and try to get the best possible rate. To save money and spend less, join over 5 million members using Rocket Money today. Rocket Money has helped save its customers up to $740 a year when using all of the app's premium features. That is a heck of a lot of melon parties. So head to rocketmoney.com/JBuck or click the link in the description to get started for free and save more money with Rocket Money. Thank you, Rocket Money, for sponsoring this video. Now back to the severed floor. Back to Salt's neck as Cobel brushes her teethies and aggressively throws a bottle of water.
I threw it on the ground.
Things quickly shift over to the Drippy Pot Cafe run by Hampton, someone from Cobel's past. I'm guessing an ex-lover because later Cobel refers to the pair as chums and they share some smoochies. Again, this is Cobel's high school reunion type visit, someone that went off to do great things depending on your perspective. And coming back to her small hometown, both feeling at home and like she doesn't belong. Hampton and the others weren't as lucky with the privilege of leaving, with Hampton's name meaning home enclosure, alluding to him being trapped here at Salt's Neck. As Cobel enters the cafe, Jimi Hendrix's Who Knows plays in the background, with its lyrics showing the struggles with finding a sense of connection and understanding in a world that feels foreign and unknowable, as Cobel doesn't recognize Salt's Neck anymore, while being on the run from Lumon, something that she theoretically pledged her life to. I'm probably digging too deep here, but Rose's hairstyle here looks like that of Emma Jane's, which some commenters from last week mentioned was Gemma's hairstyle in the Allentown Christmas Room and other Lumon CEOs. Hampton is offered a Follow the White Rabbit Matrix / Alice in Wonderland choice as he follows Cobel's Volkswagen Rabbit, meeting her at the old ether mill. During this, Charles Bradley's Where Do You Go From Here plays, and its lyrics expressing the need for change and a warning about the consequences of humanity's actions, as faded Lumon signs litter the town, showing the use and abuse approach to Salt's Neck's community. Salt's Neck was essentially the first version of Kier, a big, bustling town full of industry, with Lumon's workers living in their own community, as Sissy's home in the 9 looks awfully similar to Mark's Lumon housing in Bard Creek. Cobel and Hampton's vehicles face one another, showing how Cobel is literally facing her past, with these two lost lovers kind of mirroring that of Kier and Imogen. Both worked in the ether mill despite it literally being child labor, another thing that Lumon and many other large corporations are guilty of. It's interesting that ether was basically the first analog version of Severance, something I theorized back in our episode 3 or maybe 4 breakdown, as that's what these two and the rest of the ether mill workers probably suffered from. Come into work, get all sloopy-loopy, and man the ether vat for 10 hours, rinse and repeat. It's assumed the town is suffering from the ether addiction because of the ether mill being the only industry at the time, but could also point to the temperance movement. This was a late 1800s, early 1900s Catholic and Protestant church movement in Ireland that urged alcohol moderation. Basically, it was prohibition before prohibition. However, in doing so, ether was introduced as a workaround, a way to wean off the sauce, despite it being allegedly much more intoxicating and addicting than alcohol. Much like everything, Lumon is listening, so Hampton drives Cobel out to Sissy's place near the 9, which again, I'm saying is Lumon's housing when Salt's Neck was a thriving town, with 9 tying back to Lumon's 9 core principles. Cobel blows right past Sissy, who I originally thought was Cobel's sister, but with the age difference between Patricia Arquette and Jane Alexander, I think it's more in line that Sissy is her aunt. What I love about Sissy is that she is a living, breathing, true believer of Kier and his teachings, fully having drank the Kool-Aid.
Oh yeah!
Wearing all white, both showing the cult nature of Kier and her purity in this world, and holding a little worship stone with Kier Egan's face on it. Upstairs, there's a plaque of Sissy's that gives us a little bit more information on her character. And all of this is painfully ironic. So her first name is Celestine, meaning of the sky or heavenly, with her winning the award for Quarterly Striver for the Year of Vision. She's a hard worker and sees the clear vision or ambition of Kier's teachings. However, Sissy is Latin for blind or the blind one, as she's a silly little goose and is blindly following the teachings of Kier and Lumon. Who would ever blindly follow someone in power? Cobel frantically searches for her mother's room key. We get a quick glimpse at her old room and this supposed Kier shrine, similar to the one in Season 1, Episode 6. Heck, Cobel's entire room enshrined from that episode seems to be a way of her potentially combating her homesickness. Similar bed frame, very similar Kier shrine, all of it. This shrine has a lot of small details and interesting objects, like a vintage linen tapestry featuring 2 children riding a goat, small papier-mâché heads of the 4 tempers, a work-life balance disclaimer, portrait of Kier Egan, a Lumon flyer with the title The Open Door, like other religions having an open door policy, potentially being a recruitment flyer. Newspaper clippings, one showcasing a lighthouse that we briefly see earlier in the background, and the other stating James Egan assumes role as Lumon CEO. Lumon Core Principal tarot cards, lending more evidence that Kier's teachings are a mishmash of a handful of other religions and spiritual practices, and a tiny "you must be cut to heal" flyer with the same phrase showing up in Cobel's kitchen in Season 1, and something Milchick says at the start of this season.
We must be cut to heal.
Cobel finds the key, enters her mother's room, and this is another instance of her facing her past head on. As we learn through conversation, Cobel wasn't there to see her mother pass. She was off at a Myrtle Egan School for Girls, as we see Cobel's school photo, the same that briefly showed up in Cobel's Kier shrine back in Season 1. Right off the bat, that kind of tells me her mother still loved her, despite leaving, being a Lumon lover, while herself was a non-believer. This lack of faith in Kier actually clears up some contradicting quotes from Cobel back in Season 1, Episode 1, while on the severed floor saying her mother was an atheist, whereas later in the episode she claims that she was a devout Catholic.
You know my mother was an atheist. You know my mother was a Catholic.
In theory, both statements are correct because her mother did not believe in Kier, and theoretically Kier is supposed to be the only religion on the severed floor, meaning in the eyes of Kier and a severed employee, she was in fact an atheist, whereas in reality it sounds like she remained a faithful Catholic despite living in Salt's Neck and the overwhelming influence of Kier's cult-like teachings. In a way, Severance is showing how almost everyone is severed from something. With Cobel using Lumon and work as a way to avoid this past and her mother's passing and mourning over things with her mother's breathing tube. We had theorized that this breathing tube was in fact her mother's because of the date of birth on it, but any sort of theories of her mother being trapped on the severed floor can be thrown. Instead, Cobel grieves, plugging in the breathing tube into this green ventilator, which is the 1957 Bird Mark 7 model. Really cool design, with it having blue and red on the gauge, kind of alluding to our red Audi and blue innie, and it being all green, showing the immense woe that has filled the house. Cobel drifts into a nap, maybe meditation, potentially a penance for her not being there for her mother, as there's commotion downstairs with Sissy making the absolute lamest threats against Hampton. The pair have a moment together, again reinforcing that the two were past lovers, having only ended because Cobel went off to school. They huff some ether as Cobel states that she hasn't done this since 8 years old, which I interpreted as how and why she got out of Salt's Neck. Everyone else there was high out of their gourds while she remained sober and worked on her skills and knowledge, seeing Lumon as the only way out of this less than ideal situation. Cobel theoretically left for Lumon purely for survival. This blast from the past unlocks something, remembering her mother would have never thrown out her old stuff, figuring things may be stored in the old root cellar out front. Inside, Cobel finds a bevy of old items, a Myrtle Egan School for Girls yearbook, or rather called an annual remembrances because Severance is extra. As she opens it, subtle notes of the Kier hymn bleed through the score once again. Inside the yearbook, the school's mascot were the Fighting Kids, following the theme of Children of Kier, as we see that their field hockey team was just okay with a 9-7 record. On the next page, Harmony Cobel is the valedictorian, top of her class, while on the other page shows that she was the Wintertide Fellow for the James Egan Wintertide Fellowship, receiving top honors, eventually leading her to the position Miss Wong is currently in. Again, reinforcing that Miss Wong is not a robot, not a clone, just a talented young woman who desperately wants to play her theremin. However, things get spicy when Cobel finds her old Wintertide award, showing she was the good old fellow for the Year of Wiles, the 9th Lumon core value that's defined as devious or cunning stratagrams employed in manipulating or persuading someone to do what one wants. This perfectly reflects how Cobel has acted this entire series, and even in the moment of having this backup plan to get back at Lumon, because the holy reveal of this episode is that Cobel was the one who actually created the Severance chip.
What?
Dozens of Severance chip schematics reinforce that, yeah, Cobel was the genius behind Lumon's success. However, Kier's teachings brainwashed her into believing that these were fair game for James Egan to take credit for. All of this feels like a commentary on major discoveries from women throughout history that were then overshadowed by the masses, thinking men were the true pioneers. From smaller things like the Monopoly board game idea being stolen from Elizabeth Maggie's original The Landlord's Game, to bigger scientific discoveries like DNA double helix by Rosalind Franklin in 1953. Cobel is the genius behind Severance, and her motivation was no doubt for a way to free her mother from her suffering later in life. Something I theorized a few breakdowns ago was that Ether may have been the first analog version of Severance, which seems to be the inspiration for the chip, with Cobel having been raised in the ether mills and saw its potential.
Whatever humans can imagine, they can usually create.
However, Cobel wanted the Severance chip for good, alleviating pain for those dealing with chronic illnesses, whereas James Egan and Lumon saw it as a nefarious way to receive free labor, work in secret, and about 13 more reasons that we don't know about just yet. James Egan is the Ray Kroc of this story, screwing over the small hamburger joint of Cobel's knowledge and exposing it into dollar signs. It's fascinating to go back and watch all of Cobel's scenes back in Season 1 involving reintegration, now knowing this information, because there's a different perspective to all of it. She wants and believes in reintegration, knowing well that she's the one who created the chip, whereas the board denies it at every single turn. Cobel is just as much of a victim as many of our other characters in the series. There is one little tiny detail in the schematics that might potentially point to something larger. The last page we can see says, output proportional to time spent. Now, there have been some wild theories with very little evidence pointing to some sort of a time issue or time dilation happening on the severed floor. The very first piece of potential evidence is Mark's watch in Season 1, Episode 1, showing a date of the 4th, and then when leaving work has a date of the 5th. Timeline-wise, this is hard to fully make sense of, because if he were at work for 32 hours theoretically, clearly people on the outside world would be curious about Mark's whereabouts. There is a heavy emphasis on clocks and showing viewers the time throughout this whole series, but right now it's still a crackpot theory. So if you've got something crazy cooking on your side, drop all of your thoughts and theories in the comments. As we wrap things up, throughout this episode, Cobel has gotten several missed calls from Devin Scout. As last week I theorized Devin would actually reach out to Cobel asking for help, despite Ragabi's warnings. And yeah, third time's a charm, as Cobel picks up talking with both Devin and Mark, saying Mark is now reintegrated, but they want to try something else.
I think he's okay, but listen, we want to try something else.
Hello?
Tell me everything.
Obviously, after what we learned in this episode, Cobel is against Lumon and sided with Mark and Devin, while this potential something else is interesting. The easiest guess is having Mark go into Lumon undercover, or potentially sneaking Cobel back into Lumon, and then the two work together from there. It's interesting that Episode 9's title is The After Hours, pointing to our MDR workers staying later at Lumon, while potentially being a reference to Season 1, Episode 34 of The Twilight Zone, with that episode also being titled The After Hours. In this episode, it follows a woman who has a bunch of weird interactions at a department store full of products, then going to an abandoned department on the 9th floor, a potential nod to Lumon's 9 core principles, as we discover this woman is actually a mannequin and is granted human form for 1 month out of the year until she then has to return as a mannequin. Shocking, I know. So to theorize how this may come into play into the Severance world, maybe the Egans each get to become a human or get to take over the body after the so-called revolving. I mean, heck, maybe Helena's driver is Bard Egan. I did see this recent Severance tweet with the Cobel quote, and actually, what if things somehow pull out and we find out that Mark is the mannequin in a whole different situation we never even thought about, something to do with the outside world, and Lumon has something even grander going on. To be honest, I am wildly guessing at this point, so don't at me. But it sounds like we are in store for Severance's version of Night at the Museum, and probably a lot of wackadoo stuff we've never seen before. Things come to a close with Firewoman by The Cult playing over the credits, with the song alluding to a fiery, passionate femme fatale celebrating the power and allure of feminine energy, which I take as Cobel getting her revenge on Jaime Egan for stealing all of her work and credit. Remember, Cobel was the Wintertide Fellow for the Year of Wiles, so she no doubt has something strategic up her sleeve. And that is another Severance breakdown in the books. Really cool and emotional episode showing Cobel is not someone to mess with. Plus, Severance Avengers are on their way. No doubt Cobel, Mark, Devin team up. Anyway, feel free to drop all of your thoughts, feelings, theories, and out there ideas on Severance Season 2, Episode 8, what you think is in store for Episode 9, and we will be back with our Episode 9 breakdown next week with hopefully all of us and the MDR crew returning back to the Severed Floor. Okay, bye-bye, everyone!